I watched, my blood turning to ice. As the woman-me wife, Sarah fell to her knees, her hands flying up to shield her face. She had been on our front lawn, a small sign for her new pottery business in hand, when the HOA enforcers descended. The one they called Karina, woman with a tight blonde bun and a sneer that could curdle milk, had physically shoved her and her male companion, a hulking brute, had ripped the sign from Sarah's grasp. My God! How could this be happening? My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal rage coursing through my veins. The man then took a step toward her, his face a mask of smug entitlement. And it was in that moment that I saw red. I was across the street, talking to our neighbor, when the shouting started. It had been building for weeks. This passive-aggressive war with the HOA. They had declared Sarah's handmade sign a nuisance that diminished property values. A preposterous claim considering her work was art. But this was an act of war. Get out of here before I call the police, Karen shrieked, her voice a grating, high-pitched assault on the morning's peace. She gestured wildly at the man, who was now kicking at Sarah's sign as if it were a pile of trash. I started to run, my mind a jumble of fury and fear. Was she okay? Did they hurt her? I reached the scene just as Karen was delivering her final venomous line, "You don't belong in this neighborhood anyway. You and your little crafts." The contempt in her voice was thick enough to choke on. The man, a smug grin plastered on his face, was just about to deliver another kick to the now broken sign when I grabbed his arm. His muscles were rigid, but my grip was stronger. "You will not touch my wife," I said, my voice low and menacing. He sneered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes as he saw the fire in mine. "Oh, a hero. Are we?" he scoffed. Karen, meanwhile, had backed off slightly, pulling out her phone, no doubt to record my unlawful aggression for the HOA board. The police arrived moments later, 2 squad cars pulling up to the curb. Karen was already in full performance mode, tears welling in her eyes as she pointed a trembling finger at me. He attacked us. We were simply enforcing the community rules. And he assaulted my husband. She sobbed dramatically. Her husband, the one I had restrained, nodded along, his smug grin now replaced with a feigned look of distress. The officer, a young man with a skeptical expression, looked from Karen to me. My wife, still on the ground, was trying to get up, a small cut on her cheek where she had fallen. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" the officer asked me, his tone neutral. I calmly explained the situation, pointing to Sarah's broken sign and the cut on her cheek. The man I had grabbed cut me off, launching into a rehearsed tirade about my unprovoked violence. I just let him talk, a long, weary sigh escaping my lips. That's when the second officer, an older woman with kind eyes, walked over to my wife. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked gently. Sarah, her voice shaky, recounted the assault, pointing out the specific actions of Karen and the man. The officers began to separate us. And as they did, I saw the male officer's eyes linger on the small, almost invisible tattoo on my forearm. It was a simple trident, a mark I had carried for over 2 decades. He raised an eyebrow slightly, a subtle shift in his demeanor. "Your name, sir?" he asked. "Mason," I replied. "Retired Navy SEAL." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face. The other officer, hearing my words, looked up from her conversation with Karen. The entire energy of the scene shifted in that instant. Karen, still in the throes of her theatrical breakdown. Didn't seem to notice. He's lying. They're all lying. We have every right to be here, she screeched. But the officers were no longer paying her any mind. They were now looking at me. At the quiet resolve in my stance. They understood the gravity of the words I had just uttered. It was a world-altering twist for them. A quiet acknowledgement that their initial assumptions had been completely wrong. Suddenly, the focus shifted from my supposed aggression to the very real assault on my wife. The officers conferred quietly for a moment. And then the male officer turned back to Karen and her husband. "Ma'am. Sir. You're both under arrest for assault and destruction of property." The color drained from Karen's face. Her husband's jaw dropped in stunned silence. What? She stammered. Her voice now a whisper. But we're the victims." The officer simply held up the handcuffs. The sight of them being led away, their bluster and self-righteousness crumbling in the face of justice, was a moment of profound, quiet satisfaction. I knelt down beside my wife, wrapping her in my arms. "Are you okay?" I whispered. She nodded, tears of relief now streaming down her face. The officer with the kind eyes looked at me. A small, knowing smile on her face. "You chose the right path, sir," she said. And I knew she wasn't just talking about the past few minutes. The neighborhood, which had been holding its breath, let out a collective sigh of relief. This wasn't just a victory for us, but for everyone who had been bullied by the HOA. Justice, in its own quiet way, had finally arrived. My wife's pottery business is thriving now. And her Signa new, beautiful one she crafted herself sits proudly on our lawn. We still live here, in this quiet, suburban corner of the world. And sometimes, when I see a neighbor struggling with their own HOA issues, I remember that day. I remember the shock, the outrage, the quiet triumph. And I wonder, what do you think? Were we right to stand our ground? Or was there another way?